entrance, right? Being able to make a ship move from dry land right into the water as only Jack Sparrow can do. Entrances are pretty amazing when you think about them. Think about the last wedding you were at. The bride is in the back, the doors are closed, the music pumps up, and then everybody stands. The minister says, "Please stand," and everybody turns around and looks, right, for the grand entrance, for the bride to come down the aisle. I was watching Jimmy Fallon the other night, and I noticed that that's another grand entrance time. He will go ahead and talk up all the amazing things his guests do. And what happens is you start thinking, what an amazing guy this is. And by the time they open the curtain, he is amazing, and you love him, and it doesn't matter because the entrance is everything. Now, what's interesting to me as well is studies show, in fact, that indeed entrances are everything. There are these two guys, Friedrich Platz and another guy's named Reinhold Kopitz, and they're from Hanover University in Germany, and they did this interesting study about entrances, and they used a solo violinist as their watch these different performances and presentations. And what's interesting is what they found out is it really wasn't the actual performance that encouraged somebody to stay for the entire performance. What determined if somebody thought that a violinist was great or just good was the entrance they made. Not only the entrance that they made, but it was the connection they made with the conductor, the orchestra, and the audience that most predicted their success as a player. Not even their talent. It was their ability to connect with humanity, and for that violinist, that amazing, talented person, to become a real human to the people who were watching that made all the difference in the connection and thus that person watching the entire performance. Today is a day where we in the Christian church focus on entrances and on the ability for one to make a connection with a group of people in a way that reminds us that all of humanity is important. And you know, that is exactly what Jesus did. As we remember Palm Sunday on this day, we are mindful of the fact that Jesus is finding his focus, setting his mind, body, and spirit on the culmination of his earthly ministry. This particular entrance is the fulfillment of a prophecy by Zechariah. And today we're going to look at it in the Gospel of Mark. Mark puts it this way. He says, when the disciples brought the colt to Jesus, so they were told to go and get a donkey, essentially, they threw their cloaks over it, and Jesus sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut from the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was very late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. That entrance is one that those of us who grew up in the church remember, and if you were a little kid, chances are you too took palms and said, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Now, throughout my faith journey, I have always been mindful of Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem. But Marcus Borg wrote a book a few years ago called The Last Week, which encouraged me to think about not only Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem, but there was someone else making an entrance as well. Jesus was coming from the east, and from the west, there was someone else, and his name was Pilate. You remember Pilate from the story. He was the governor of Judea, and he was coming from his little seaside palace to bring about the reminders that the Romans were in rule over the Jewish people. And it was important for him to remind them that this Passover celebration is a good celebration for them, but they needed to be mindful that Rome was in charge. Now, be mindful that the Passover celebration is a celebration of the Israelites' liberation from bondage in Egypt. Now, the Romans, in some ways, for 90 years, had also put the Israelites in their own kind of bondage. And there was concern, true concern, that in fact the government might try to be overthrown during the Passover. So Pilate came in from the west in such a way to remind them who was really in charge of Rome. Who was really in charge of Jerusalem was Rome. He came in with great military power, with horses and chariots and gleaming armor. It was a grand state of affairs and designed specifically to intimidate humanity, to intimidate the Israelites who had gathered there. Now, while he was coming in this way, Jesus was coming from the other end of town in a very different ways. He was coming from the Mount of Olives, which was a tradition that the Messiah would appear from that place. He wasn't coming in as a mighty king on a mighty steed. He was coming in as the Prince of Peace, mounted on a donkey. Now remember, donkeys symbolize passive nature. They have a passive nature, and they symbolize peace. He was surrounded by a ragtag group of his own soldiers that we refer to as disciples. He was surrounded by people who had been exploited and oppressed by the occupation of Rome. He was surrounded by Jews and slaves. He was surrounded by the homeless and the hungry and the chronically ill. I was thinking about it. If this had been Indianapolis, Jesus probably could have come from either the east or west, those areas that have not been regentrified yet. The areas where there are people who do not necessarily speak English and have created their own economy, both east and west. If you went on the Ascent 121 journey, you were able to witness that, because chances are you don't spend your days on Washington Street, east or west. If it had been Indianapolis, Pilate probably would have come from the north, right? He probably would have come from the north side. He probably would have passed the fine homes of those people who he knew and who were part of his life. He probably would have come in such a way to remind us that money rules. But Jesus would not have. He would have come to a place where probably most of us don't spend much time. Now, be mindful, in just a few days, these two men will meet, and these two different parades and these two different paths will mean different things to different people. My question for us today, as we continue on this Palm Sunday journey idea 2,000 years later, is, what parade are you following today? What parade will you follow in the weeks to come and in the years to come? Are you in the Pilate parade, or are you in the Jesus parade? Do you take the road less traveled, or do you take the road you know? Will you follow Pilate this week and beyond, or will you follow Jesus? See, every time we choose triumph over compassion, every time we choose glory over generosity, every time we choose retribution over reconciliation, every time we choose competition over compassion, we choose to be part of Pilate's parade. This week, as we enter into Holy Week, we are entering into Jerusalem, and two paths have been laid before us. One road will follow Pilate, and we all know this road. We've walked it many times. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar. It isn't where we really want to be, but it's where most of the crowd is gathered. It stifles the growth of the Spirit. It's predictable. It asks little of us, but it does say to us, hey, you got to work on being comfortable for you, your family, and all that is yours. It's a road that most people take. Today, I want to encourage us to be mindful of what it really means to follow Jesus on this path. In some ways, it takes for all of us discipline and love and courage. It means we it means that we are aware that we tend to push other people out of the way who we don't want to see or who we don't believe have a right in our circle. See, if we follow Jesus, we have a commitment to say, yes, we live in community with one another, that we have a commitment to live with humility and hope, that we have a commitment to indeed believe that love in the end will rule not only our hearts, but this world. We have become a nation where you either decide if you're in this party or you're that party, or if you believe this or if you believe that. That's the Pilate way of thinking. Jesus' parade leads us into difficult situations where we have to figure out how to love one another no matter what. Jesus leads us down a path where we have to figure out that hope and love and grace and mercy will not only have a place in the world, but will indeed rule the world. I don't know about you, but it is really hard. It's hard because I like my life, and I think it's pretty good. But chances are, Jesus wasn't too concerned with what house he was living in or what side of town he was living in or what car he was driving. Clearly, he drove an ass, right? We have to find a way beyond the comforts that we have to be open to the world that's to the east and to the west on Washington Street. We have to have a willingness to be open and to believe that God will make a way, not only for me and my family, but for all people. On this Holy Week, I want to encourage you to be mindful what road you're on right now. If it's a road where you spend the most of your time being concerned about your needs and your family, I want to encourage you to look up from the road and to look at what other paths are available to you. See, God is trying to meet us, not just here on Sunday mornings, but as every moment passes, as every second passes, and as every minute passes. We had a great conversation this past week in our Love Everybody Always class, where we were reminded that whether or not we like it or not, there are people on the corners of this nation on a regular basis begging. They're begging for money, yes, but what else are they begging for? Are they begging for the attention of someone? Are they begging for a little bit of hope? Now, we've all heard the story, right? Well, they're all part of a bigger gang and they make $1 million a year. I don't know that that's necessarily true, or else you would see a lot of people looking like us on the corners of the roads. These are people who need to know that we believe in hope and love, not just for us, but for the whole world. Now more than ever, we live in a nation and we live in a church that has to be reminded that there is a place on the road for each and every one of us. It's not easy. It's not easy to welcome everyone into the fold, but it's necessary in order for us to truly experience the risen Lord. So today the message is clear. We have a choice. We have a choice to take the road less traveled. And I encourage you as you move into this week to do just that. As you make your way into work this week, consider taking a different path. Consider what that might do to you. Consider what that might do for your journey and how it might open your eyes to some new and different things. As you make your way by the person on the side of the road, I'm not going to give you any mandate to do anything. Just pause and pray. Just pause and pray. And say, God, you are as real as the air we breathe, and you are as present in that person as you are in me. How are you working in this world? And how will you use the likes of me? The road less traveled is not an easy one. Just ask Jesus. Just follow Jesus. It would be easy for us to leave here today and then to come back on Easter Sunday and say, whoa, everything's great and it's fantastic and woohoo. But the truth is, it's a very long week. Jesus gathers with his friends and he has a meal with them where he washes their feet, where he knows, in fact, not everybody is truly following him and someone will deceive him. He is a man who on Friday goes through darkness and death for all of us. It's important for us to be mindful of all of these things because we can't truly experience the love and light of Easter Sunday if we're not willing to walk through the darkness. There is darkness in our world, my friends, and you will see it this week if you look for it. But if you look for it with the hope and promise of Easter morning, I guarantee you, you will experience the love and hope of God beyond your understanding. Let us take this time now to indeed travel the road less traveled. Let us indeed right now be mindful of every entrance we make being an opportunity to connect with humanity. Let us be mindful that we have lots of choices to make, and Jesus only has us, only has us. Let's take the road less traveled. Will you pray with me? God of grace and love, there are lots of parades in this world. There are lots of people shouting, "You're number one." And when the rough comes around, when the tough get moving, well, oftentimes we end up pointing fingers instead. Be with us this week and help us to be mindful that if we let you be number one in our lives and follow us, and we follow you, chances are we will indeed be given what we need to not point fingers, but to open our arms to all of humanity, now and forevermore. Amen.